The phone rang at 3:47 p.m., and sound cut through the low hum of the garage like a knife. David Reaper Stone stood over an engine, and the world narrowed to the voice on the other end. Rachel, breathless, words bending at the edges. "He's gone," she said. "Lily's gone. The bus, there's a backpack. Mr. Buttons is—" David's hands went numb. He could feel the grease on his palms and the life draining from the air. For a second, the noise of the shop fell away, only the echo of a small name, and then a picture rose, too fast and sharp. The little red teddy with the crooked button eye tucked beneath Lily's chin every night. Mr. Buttons. If this moves you, stay until the end. Like, subscribe, and tap notifications so you don't miss what happens next. He was at the bus stop before he remembered putting on his jacket. The backpack lay on the curb like a sad declaration. Crumpled zipper, a smear of dirt, a torn seam where the teddy's arm should have been. David crouched, thumbed the seam, and felt the edge of something hard sewn into the lining. A small commercial tracker. A detail as mundane as a button and as damning as a map. At the clubhouse, the walls still smelled of oil and cheap whiskey, the fluorescent light buzzing above the long table where men with chapters on their chests moved like a single animal. Tank lit a cigarette and let the smoke curl in the dim. Snake cleaned a gun with the same slow, meticulous care he'd used to listen. Diesel slammed a fist and laughed too loud, the sound full of the thing he could not say, fear. David did not talk much. When he spoke, it was a precise thing that shaped plans. "Lily's missing," he told them. "Mr. Buttons had a tracker sewn in. It pinged once, 40 miles north, industrial strip." Tank's jaw tightened. Cartel territory. Detective Tom Miller came with a different scent, old coffee and paper. He'd spent years inside precincts where men in suits bent statutes into origami for the right price. He had been the sort of cop who still took his coffee black because he believed things could be stripped to their bones and still be true. He set a folder on the table and pushed it toward David. "You should have called me first," Miller said. His voice was rough. He lost a partner to the same complacency that let killers move in the light. "But you called. I pulled what I could. The name linking to these pings shows up under Mendez, Carlos El Lobo. Not a small-time thief. He runs the trash routes. He moves children for money, hides behind bribes." David looked at the picture Miller slid free. A thin man, hands scarred, a lupine jaw. Carlos El Lobo Mendez. The name tasted like old blood. "He's not walking into a courtroom on his own feet," David said. "We'll get Lily." They moved like a wound closing. The club took engines, a humming pack of steel and leather. They rolled through strip malls and under the last wash of sun until neon seams began to stitch the dark. The convoy had the rhythm of a heart, thump, thump. Each motorcycle a pedal press against a different fate. David remembered Lily as he had each night when his patience thinned and the club weighed like a second skin. The way she made badges of dough and offered them with solemn pride. How she tucked Mr. Buttons under her chin and insisted the crooked eye was a map to home. He thought of Rachel at the kitchen sink, hands worrying at a dish towel as if the small motion could iron life back to order. They found the warehouse at dusk. It was an old body of a place with windows like blind eyes, its lot littered with the kind of trash that tells no stories. Two men in cheap jackets moved like they knew the place. The cartel had enough men to think it was a small army. David's plan did not need to be clever. It needed one thing, to make Carlos miscount. There was a bluff. Those who had children would understand the shape of it. Promise yourself to be brave so you could be able to move later. The club staged an exchange in a parking lot 1 block over, a slow, risky theater. Tanks and lighters, a patched flag, men who breathed like cliffs. It was bait made of conscience and wrath. While the cartel's eyes leaned toward the bait,
A smaller team, Snake, Diesel, and two others, slipped past the warehouse's back, doors sliding like old teeth. The narrative inside the warehouse was quieter. Lily sat on a pallet, knees tucked, Mr. Buttons in one fist. He had been stitched back with angry hands. One glassy button had been replaced with a tiny tracker. She hummed the lullaby that fished hope from the dark. When the men in the warehouse heard engines, they were already certain of their victory. That certainty was clean and fragile. The noise around the parking lot broke into a different shape suddenly. Engines revved low, then a volley of controlled chaos. Men shouted. Someone threw a bottle, someone else a kerosene lamp. The exchange became a scrape, then a brawl. In the warehouse, a door gave way to motion. In seconds that felt both too long and too precise, Snake and Diesel found Lily and swept her up without theatrics. She clung to Mr. Buttons, and when David's voice found her, she did not cry at first. Her small hands were full of resolve that frightened him more than tears would have. Outside, the confrontation peeled away the pretense of bargaining. Cartel men pushed like tide. The club pushed back. Bullets wrote dangerous commas in the air. Shadows moved in staccato. Miller arrived in the interval with two uniforms, and the weight of the law finally aligned with something other than paperwork.
He stepped into the melee not as savior, but as witness and a man trying to be better than his past. David found Carlos in a stairwell, the lieutenant like a cornered animal with his pride left as though it were the only currency he trusted. The fight between them was not cinematic. It was the ugly, blunt calculus of two men with histories that had trained them to break one another. David left him breathing, conscious enough to talk, but broken in the way that made people finally honest. Carlos spat blood and said words that smelled of entitlement and of being used. Names dropped like coins, routes, addresses, the ugly architecture of a trade in children. He thought only of profit until the floor dropped where Lily's image stood, little fists and a crooked button eye. "You thought you could take what wasn't yours," David said. He did not hold back the cruelty of the truth. "You thought she was a ledger." Carlos laughed, a small, dangerous sound, and the laugh died when Miller's hands cuffed him and the real presence of consequence settled like a bruise. The club had done what the system had failed to do. They had found the child. That did not make them angels. It made them family, and family had different rules. In the hours after, the house felt like a small country rebuilt. Rachel made a pot of tea and then forgot to drink it. Lily slept on the couch with Mr. Buttons tucked into her ribs. David sat on the porch and let smoke of someone else's cigarette blend into the night because he could not be inside and awake without watching the house like it might try to leave. Detective Miller stayed until dawn. He moved through the paperwork as if untangling a snake, not with vengeance but with a need to put things on record. "If this goes to trial," he began. "It will," David told him. "But not because we asked, because you put a badge where it couldn't be bought." Miller's eyes held a past that ached. "There'll be men looking to make you pay," he said. "Not because of the law, because you embarrassed them." David's hands were steady. "Then we'll make sure Lily's name is louder than their threats." They did not celebrate. They organized nights on the porch in shifts. Men who once kept their burdens private now brought soup and blankets. The clubhouse's patched flag flew on the front lawn like a warning and a promise. The community that had been a series of small private salvations folded itself open and took David's family in. Carlos faced the machinery of prosecution with the dizziness that comes when power begins to slide. He was convicted after evidence, after Miller's dogged file, after testimony that was careful and terrible and true. He received life without parole. Inside a cell, the cartel's reach thinned to rumor and bruised pride. Outside, rumor had consequences. There were whispered tales of payback in places where men kept knives for reasons they did not speak of. That part of it, other men preserving their codes with violence, David thought about in the dark. He had no taste for becoming what he despised. Lily woke sometimes with hands curled, the world of sleep still sharp with images it should never have contained. At first, she refused to go near playgrounds. The city seemed full of warehouses. David learned the vocabulary of small comforts: warm socks on rainy mornings, pancakes with smiley faces, a steady curfew. He learned to read the noises of the house, to wake at a creak when she did, to leave the light on for an hour after she fell asleep. On the first anniversary of her rescue, David sat at his kitchen table and wrote a letter, not as an act of spite, but as a ritual. He folded the paper until its edges were sharp, and he wrote exactly what he needed to say to the man who had taken a child's afternoon and turned it into a thing that would take years to repair. The letters became an odd liturgy, a sheet delivered, a return of acknowledgement through channels that bruised reputation. They were not vengeance so much as a way to mark time. Each year David wrote and posted that same small thing, a file of memory, a reminder that someone had kept watch. The warehouse where Lily had been held did not stay a wound forever. The city, practical and stubborn, repurposed the lot into a playground. It was a decision made by hands that wanted to see reclamation instead of erasure. Sprung swings replaced broken pallets. Paint blurred over old graffiti. On the first day the swing squeaked. David watched Lily from a bench. Mr. Buttons tucked into her backpack now, his button eye fixed on the world like a small lighthouse. She climbed the ladder to the slide and slid down with a laugh that was spare but real. Around them, the club kept their distance, a perimeter of quiet men who had taught the child to be brave with the steady steadiness of presence. They did not make sermons. They made dinners, fixed fences, watched school traffic. That, David thought, was the fragile, honest work of protection. When Lily was older, she would write a paragraph in a notebook about the thing that had once been nameless. For now, she learned to sleep through thunder. For now, Mr. Buttons held the corner of her backpack while she jumped. David kept the first letter he had written to Carlos folded in the top drawer of his desk, an ugly monument to the fact that justice had arrived and that it had a cost. There were nights David woke with his palms empty and his heart full of an anger that left him raw. He stopped himself from going to lengths he would not be proud of. He let the law do its work when it could. But he also taught the men he led that brotherhood meant more than muscle. It meant the slow accumulation of small kindnesses and the refusal to let a child be a ledger. When Lily's nightmares returned, the club turned up with lights and blankets and stories of ridiculous mistakes they'd made when they were young. Laughter, they found, was a medicine the right kind of rough. The country would speak of the bust for a week, a headline and then the gradual fade. The cartel stitched its wounds and reshuffled hands. Men like Carlos paid in cells and in the quiet retributive economy of prison. They were not heroes, they were consequences. David kept watch. He kept letters. He kept Mr. Buttons under his pillow sometimes, because he could not help thinking of a crooked button eye as a compass that had pointed him home. When Lily rode a bike in the driveway and scraped her knee, he bounded and scolded her with an affection that left no room for performative stoicism. When she refused to talk about the worst nights, he waited until she was ready. Detective Miller made a point of dropping by on odd days with stories of his other losses and a new file on a different problem that needed his attention. They had become an odd kind of friends, men who had both bent toward the same crooked truth and decided to stay upright anyway. Justice had arrived not as a trumpet, but as a series of small, necessary noises. A gavel, a file stamped closed, a stack of letters, a playground opening. But the moral ledger remained unsettled. The club had saved a child. In doing so, they had also crossed lines that would haunt them later in different forms. Friendly faces avoided, threats made in long silences, the way David's hands would shake at the edge of an anniversary.
On a cool morning months after the arrests, David walked Lily to the bus stop, a route now mapped in his chest. She clutched Mr. Buttons and did not look back. The street smelled of asphalt and coffee and a city learning to forgive itself. As the bus pulled away, David stood in the same spot where the backpack had once been and felt the thickness of everything he had done press in. He did not know whether the thing he'd become could be forgiven by law or by any god. He only knew that his daughter slept, and for him that was a kind of verdict he could live with. The world outside would keep turning, with its compromises and its cruelties. Inside their little rebuilt house, there were dinners and homework and the sound of a child learning that a broken thing could be fixed enough to hold. Some nights he still wrote the letters, small, quiet, not for vengeance, but to mark himself as a man who did not forget. He addressed them to a man who would never look up from the pages and discover
what he had done. He sent them anyway. The playground now stood where the warehouse had been. Children ran with Mr. Button-style plush toys on slides that knew nothing of the dark rooms that once breathed beneath them. David sat on a bench and watched Lily push another child on a swing. The crooked button eye flashed like a tiny private flare. He exhaled and let the sound go where it would. The cost of the rescue was counted in nights without sleep, in legal entanglements, in men with too many scars to fix cleanly. But the tally also included dinners brought by the club, a detective who learned to trust, and a little girl who learned to laugh again. The war was not over. The cartel still moved under skirts of legality, and men who profited off pain would always find ways to hide. But for tonight, the neighborhood was full of voices and not sirens. For tonight, Lily climbed the slide and shouted for the joy of it. Mr. Buttons hung from her backpack and winked with that crooked eye, a small, stubborn relic of survival. David watched and thought of how you rebuild a life, not with single grand acts, but with presence, with watchfulness, and with the stubborn refusal to let violence own the story. He folded another letter and slid it into an envelope he would never send on a whim. He kept it anyway. He rose when the light began to thin and walked home with the smell of the city on his coat. Behind him, the playground creaked, the sound of children pressing small, brave lives into the frame of a place that had once been darkness. The club rode by in a low, respectful line. Men who knew they had done wrong and right in the same breath. They nodded at him as they passed. No words were necessary. Inside, Lily fell asleep with Mr. Buttons tucked into the crook of her arm. David turned the lock, sat on the edge of her bed for a long moment, and let the room, full of small, ordinary light, tell him what he had been fighting for. Outside, the night held 100 possibilities and a few safe certainties. The club would keep watch, Detective Miller would keep his file open, and the letters would keep their small ritual. David did not imagine salvation as one clean thing. He imagined it as many small, stubborn commitments, the sort that keep children safe in a world that too often forgets to. A siren wailed somewhere in the distance, brief and unthreatening now, a reminder of the law's presence and its limits. David sat a little longer, the leather of his jacket creaking as he shifted, and thought about the future he would make for Lily, one stitch at a time. He folded the last letter and placed it in the drawer beside a photograph of a tiny girl holding a crooked buttoned bear. Outside, someone tuned an engine. The club prepared for another night of watching. Inside, a child slept. The world had not been made whole, but a family had been reclaimed. They would tell the story in pieces, some for headlines, some for courtrooms, some for campfires at the clubhouse. But the part David carried would always be the small, private one, a crooked button eye, warm against the child's cheek, and the way her fingers curled around it as if it were a life preserver. He turned the light off and left the house to its quiet. The night folded over them like a promise that was never absolute, but was enough.